Good afternoon. Thanks for staying with us for the second part and joining us if you just came. I see a lot of our students here from URAP, and we're going to talk about the projects we actually made this semester and here's your feedback. But first I'd like to give thanks and honor Steve Beck, who has sponsored lunch for us. And to be fair, we expected about 50 people to be here. Unfortunately, we didn't expect to serve more than 60 lunches. So you guys cleaned off the table, which is a very good sign, which means that there's more appetite, and then we can do this again, and we can build this audience. And so I want to thank you again. Do you want to say a few things?
Just very briefly, thank you, Greg. As a Berkeley graduate in EECS, the first year they offered that in 1971, I've stayed around Berkeley, and this new social apps lab is one of the most exciting new developments that I've heard of. A few weeks ago, Professor Paul Wright just called me up and told me about this and asked me if, based on past gifts that my family has given to CITRIS, to honor us, so we really appreciate that. And meanwhile, the work that Greg and Ken and James and all the students are doing is very exciting and very important. So in our own small, humble way, we're honored to be able to support it and feed the energy here. So I'm looking forward to seeing the part of the program I can stay for, and go Bears.
Thank you so much. All right, next I'd like to introduce Steve DeMello, who made Social Apps Lab at CITRIS possible, and who also helped build the Data and Democracy Initiative that Ken Goldberg is going to speak about in just a moment. So, but first, Steve, come over. Tell us why we're doing this. Thank you so much.
Tell us why we're doing this.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you all for coming today, and welcome, a belated welcome to CITRIS. We're very happy to be sponsoring the event today and playing a small role in seeing the Social Apps Lab come together. More importantly, though, we'd also like to recognize and thank a couple of folks who really made the work very possible and easy for us to create the Social Apps Lab. And these are the divisions of social science, Dean Carla Hesse, and the Division of Arts and Humanities with Dean with Tony Cascardi, and also the Townsend Center for the Humanities. If it were not for their work early on to encourage the initial development, we wouldn't be here today, and we wouldn't have the center up and operating. So please enjoy the rest of the day, and we look forward to the rest of the content. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you. Yes. So, Ken, would you like to say a few things about data and democracy?
1 minute. All right, thank you. First of all, let's have just a quick round of applause for Greg and James and everybody who organized this. Thank you, guys. We are very proud of this. And just very briefly, the new thing that Greg just alluded to is called, a new initiative here at CITRIS is going to be called Data and Democracy. We're figuring out what exactly that is. If you're wondering, we're trying to figure it out too. But the key idea is that data is not just literally data, numbers, and bits, but we're really thinking more broadly about all kinds of new technologies, in particular social media technologies. And the democracy part is not just about voting per se or even running governments, but more about decision making. And at all levels. So from small organizations, neighborhoods, up through cities, to state, to national, or even international level. So we're looking at a variety of different things. And the one thing that we're very excited about, and I'll just give a hint of this, is that after all the conflicts that have happened here on campus and on other campuses around the world in the last few weeks about clashes with police, we're particularly interested in developing some kind of tool that would gather a lot of the documentation, a lot of the digital documentation that comes in after an event like that, like photographs and video, and organize it in a temporal way so that you can see exactly what happened. So when there's an image, it's not just taken out of context. You can see what was happened before, what happened after. You get the full spectrum, temporal spectrum of what happened. So we like the idea that all the videos be lined up so that you can step through and see at any given instant, you could go back across dozens of videos and photographs and see it from many different perspectives. There's also a spatial dimension there too, which is another step. It's how do you arrange it spatially? So there's all these things that we're really excited about. And if you're interested in that, please talk with Greg or James, and you'll be hearing more about the Digital Democracy Initiative, DDI, starting in the spring. Thanks.
That's great. So Thank you, Ken. It'll be like bullet time for protesters. It'll be great. Like that. Anyway, so now we are going to introduce what Social Apps Lab is all about. And there's two key points to the Social App Lab. As you can see from this morning's presentation, there's a lot of work in this area of how to optimize society. The two things that I'd like to emphasize by way of introduction is that the Social Apps Lab is a very interdisciplinary space. And it is the collaboration of all aspects of campus, anthropology, art, computer science in particular, that makes it possible to build an app in 6 months. And many centers have tried to create this collaboration, but in this place here, it's particularly lively. And so the other thing we want to emphasize is that mobile technologies are the thing we see as the node that connects the human presence, the user, to the digital world and to the physical world at the same time. Because we are computing where we are, we can, and because mobile media follow us wherever we are, we can leverage our digital voice and our physical voice at the same time. And there's many ways in which we want to build on that connection, and there's a theory that helps us out, there's a practice that helps us out. And so at the Social Apps Lab, we're engaging in this critical practice of connecting the physical world with the virtual world, hopefully in view of optimizing both. You know how games have many versions. Every 2 weeks there's a new version of Cityville or so coming out. But the real city doesn't optimize itself. It doesn't get versioned. And that's what we want to push at. We also are looking at a model of collaboration not so only inside the university but also outside, and by getting some of our ideas out to actual real publics as soon as possible, and to test them in the real world rather than just in a lab and write a paper and publish it and be done. We see our success as being that, but also as being the ability to engage people outside of the university in our projects. And so some of the projects we are about to launch, we're going to present right now. James.
Well, before we do that, we're going to thank the benefactors who made the interdisciplinary effort possible. The Social Apps Lab, we created it 2 years ago almost, maybe a little bit less, by going to 3 principal players on campus who are interested in the intersection between social science, arts and humanities, and engineering and computer science. And I want to recognize, first of all, CITRIS, Paul Wright, who couldn't be here today and sends his greetings. Steve DeMello is here representing CITRIS. CITRIS made it possible for us to give us lab space and a home here to try this interdisciplinary project. Fundamental to our support on campus is the Division of Social Sciences. And I want to thank deeply Dean Carla Hesse, who is here and who will be talking to us in a few moments, for her initial fundamental support, a meeting that we had in the dark days of the winter over a nice drink, and she just supported us with great generosity, enthusiasm, and insight. And without the support of social sciences, this would not have happened. Right. And let me also thank Tony Cascardi, the Dean of Arts and Humanities, and Janet Broughton, who was then Dean when we went to the Dean's office in Arts and Humanities. She as well supported us. Tony Cascardi did so in a previous iteration through a program at the Townsend Center. So we have CITRIS, the Division of Social Sciences, the Division of Arts and Humanities coming together to make this effort possible. We also want to thank URAP on campus. That's the Undergraduate Research Apprenticeship Program. They have been able to supply us with such talent. It's just extraordinary. I think we're always amazed at the energy and brilliance of our undergraduates. And we've been really lucky to have undergraduates from the 3 divisions. We have, of course, engineers and computer scientists, but we have anthropologists, art practice majors, cognitive scientists. And it's that combination, I think, that has been for us the source of the kind of creativity we're emphasizing. So what I thought we would do, and one more, along with Steve Beck and Candice Egers, I want to thank Global Metropolitan Studies, who also helped provide the funds to make the conference possible. Global Metropolitan Studies is an interdisciplinary venture on campus, and they were very generous as well. And now what we'd like to do is call upon the students and our teams that help build these apps. And I would just like you to stand up for a minute, everybody who's here. Go ahead, just stand up. all the students. So we have different teams here. We have different teams. We have, let's see, who did City Sandbox? I see City Sandbox standing over there, and Hugh has been the team leader. And this is an interdisciplinary team as well. Dengue Torpedo, which you'll see by, where's Dengue? Right here. All right, again, Jackie Wu has been the team leader. These teams have done a brilliant job, and I hope you'll appreciate the results. And here's some U-Rappers. Where are there any more U-Rappers? I think they're out actually manning the front desk. We've had a marketing team. We have their names right here. They put in an extraordinary effort. And I think in many ways at the university, perhaps we don't recognize enough how great our undergraduates are in actually producing world-changing things. So at this point, we're going to talk about the Social Apps Lab in a bit more detail. And I want to explain for a moment that we have four agendas of interdisciplinary and collaborative research. And I want to talk for a moment about that because I think that that's what makes the Social App Lab somewhat different than other kinds of labs producing apps. Our first agenda of research is to discover and research city problems that are appable, if you will, that are appable through crowdsourcing, apps that engage local knowledge about problems that residents know best, precisely because they have the best sources of information about them. So that's the kind of problem we're interested in, and you'll see in the apps that we present that we've gone after those sorts of issues. Our second agenda is to design mobile games that motivate player residents to investigate the city to solve game challenges, to create, in effect, a feedback loop of urban research through gameplay. And thus, at the lab, we design urban detection apps that, for example, get players to explore the city on foot, to report on pollutants, to eliminate disease vectors, to travel the historical layerings of time and space at specific urban sites. The third agenda of the lab is that such game-driven explorations must have both a practical and a critical result. If we get people to exercise by walking, for example, they do so in modes that we hope challenge them to think about their routines of city life in different ways, in provocative ways. Our fourth agenda is to evaluate ethically and politically the many kinds of metrics that players generate in using the apps. And these metrics engage important questions about monitoring and the use of signature digital data as they reveal scientifically significant patterns of behavior, or as they expose environmental conditions, or as they produce knowledge critical to democratic initiatives. And those ethical and political questions we try to address up front. So we're going to show you a couple of apps. And let's switch to the dengue screen, which is on one, I think. All right. So quickly, I'm going to discuss one of our apps these are apps that we've recently launched in one form or another, mostly in sort of closed beta testing. Dengue is a perfect problem for crowdsourcing solutions. It is a mosquito-borne viral disease that is spreading uncontrollably worldwide. It affects about 50 million people a year. 2.5 billion are at risk. In the Western Hemisphere, for example, Brazil reports about 80% of dengue cases, topping 1 million in 2010, which was basically double of the year before. Death rates have increased 94%. It's a serious problem. And the issue for us is that it's a problem that can be addressed through civic action, because no vaccine is available. The only effective control for dengue or for epidemics is to eliminate the mosquito breeding sites, which are typically left to governmental agencies. And that infection and death rates have skyrocketed, indicates that centralized municipal efforts fail because their strategies and technologies to gather information and eliminate sites are inefficient and maladaptive. Why? Because most mosquito foci are small and residential, typically found in everyday containers like uncovered discarded tires, uncovered buckets, flower pots. So dengue is the kind of epidemic that requires residentially based community action. And our app, Dengue Torpedo, starts from the premise that residents are the best sources of information about these mosquito breeding sites, and therefore also the most efficient agents of elimination. And so what it proposes is to use cell phone technology in gaming, first to crowdsource the identification and mapping of mosquito breeding sites, the problem of information. And second, to motivate residents to act through gameplay to eliminate the sites, the problem of execution. And it also proposes what we're calling a capillary strategy of research and development that involves local user residents in researching, testing, and designing the application itself. So, Dengue Torpedo is based on sending an SMS report that identifies mosquito breeding sites. Now, torpedo in Portuguese means both text message and a torpedo, the weapon, the torpedo. So we think it's a great word to capture the spirit of this app. And players file reports and eliminate the reported breeding sites and upload before and after photographs. They recruit new players and they win points for gameplay and build a public reputation. An example is an example of a report identifying a breeding site. So I found a breeding site in Berkeley. We just typed this in today, and successful reports are sent to our website for public viewing. So it's a combination of cell phone, basic cell phone, no smartphone. Place like Brazil, 90-95% penetration of cell phone use, of which about 10 to 12, 15% would be smartphone. So it's got to be for basic phone, but it's combined with a website, and the report is immediately mapped onto the Dengue Torpedo website. Once a report is registered in the website, the reporter has to upload a photo to document the site, and through web use, users can browse reports, claim reports, reported breeding sites, and proceed to eliminate them. So players win points for identifying, reporting, eliminating breeding sites, as well as recruiting new players. And we have we think of this project as motivating three levels of engagement. That of the neighborhood, the household, and the individual. And I'm just going to show you a few pages of the app itself so you can see how we've tried to design that. The main page, okay? There's a lot of educational material up top. I don't have time to show it, but there is a heat map linked to real-time visualizations of reports and their resolutions. There's a forum which leads visitors to pages where players have posted innovative ideas. Let me show you a house page. Oh, I wanted to say that on the home page you can select featured neighborhoods, and you get the featured neighborhoods up top, and then and the featured houses within those neighborhoods. When you click on one of those, you can go to a household page. And members of the house can upload photos and blog entries to share prevention ideas and new solutions in fighting dengue. They can communicate with other players. Other players can comment, give stars, motivate, and reward. Just let me show you a few elements of the household page. Players find reports on a real-time feed of recent reports that house members make, or they can click on find reports on the home page, and all recent reports were sorted by distance will populate the map. Now there are three statuses of reports, and I just want to show you these. The orange means that a report is open, that it's been identified by a player but no action has been taken. Now teal color means that the report has been claimed by somebody, by a player who has 72 hours to resolve it. And these reports are also coded on the map. And then finally, the gray means that the report has been resolved. The breeding site has been eliminated. And here you can see how it's possible to open a report and then claim it. A resolved report with updated before and after photographs. I'm not going to talk about verification, but our idea is trust but verify. This is a complex aspect of the app, and we could talk about it later. But we have thought a lot about the problem of verification. Report status, you get a sense of what each report slip looks like. Households win redeemable points, and this is an aspect of the game. We are delivering a skeleton app to the neighborhoods in Brazil and Managua. In Sao Paulo, Rio, and Managua are three sites. And where we have focus groups who are helping us to design this app. So this is just basically a closed beta version.
And what kinds of redeemable points and what they're used for, we're going to let residents tell us. But we have 3 ideas. One thing that I've arranged in Brazil is that most people have prepaid cell phones and they must recharge them. So the major recharge company in Brazil has given us 24 months of free recharges. Okay? So that's one kind of reward that really makes sense to people. So you get 100 points, you get $10 a month. But coupons from sponsors also seems to work, and badges of achievement definitely work. People are proud to have clean houses, and they want that badge. So I wanted to give you a sense of this sort of thing. Household page also features blogs where players can share their prevention ideas and game experience. They can use the page to connect individual profiles of other house members. We've discovered that people really like to visit. They like to go to other neighborhoods. They like to see what's going on in other households. So we've done that. The individual profile page, here's an example, has a lot of stuff. And I don't have time to go through it all. But you can see there are reports and map shows where the reports have been made, prevention ideas, points, badges. Visitors can access the house profile and that kind of thing. There's a history of player reports. You can filter by report slips. Players can complete a report in this process by finding one that's open, claiming it, going out, eliminating the mosquito site, uploading the photograph, and clicking complete. A really important aspect of this app is learning about dengue. We're especially, children are the most vulnerable. They get over 60% of the cases and they're never consulted by government, or rarely. And kids are really attracted to this technology. And so it's very much about education. And the blogs on the sites are important. There are a variety of ways to learn about dengue prevention from the people who are on the front lines. Here's a forum page where people can share. Prevention ideas are supplied. People can pose questions and help answer and get help from other people and check out what other communities are doing about it and become a dengue warrior, a great mosquito slayer. And, Brazil has expressed its support in a big way. I mean, the slogan seems to be, Rio 2014 without dengue, right? World Cup without dengue. I think I have another minute to show, maybe half a minute, to show you one other app. No, actually not. We're going to go to your two, and then we'll come back. I want to show you one at the end in the future section.
All right. Thank you, James. Beautiful. And I'm going to need the help of some collaborators to make this work. As you can see, we're very interdisciplinary, and one thing that we want to mention also is that you work together with dengue experts from campus. And
can you mention Dr. Josefina Coloma, who is from the School of Public Health, and her colleague, Dr. Eva Harris, professor of infectious diseases, also from the School of Public Health, and they have extraordinary dengue work, pioneering, even legendary, in Nicaragua. And they have worked very closely with our team. And we're going to hear from Josefina in the workshop this afternoon. Forgive me for not mentioning it earlier, but it's been so vital to the project to have that sort of link with the scientists who are on the front line in fighting dengue.
So while we do this, we're trying to have a lot of fun, too, because we're trying to make games that are actually fun to play. And so the whole idea of dengue is that it's satisfying to fill out these forms and hit completed, and it's sometimes also satisfying to just have a lot of fun with stuff. And this is our team photo. There's 3. Okay, ignore. Let's try again here. Preview quit. There's 3 aspects of research that we like to work in, and there it's coming back. Wonderful. We look at games as performances, right? So every time you play, you perform, but which context do you perform in? One is game mechanics, discovery of self. You find out how you stand in relationship to the game. The other is the magic circle, discovering the context that you play in. And finally, the most wide one is the full context of the collective of all players that ever play the game and how they are producing data that we can look at to analyze the aggregate of all behaviors. There's a theory of engagement that we use a lot. Here's a picture of me serving a birthday cake to my children. And the children here are engaged in what? They're engaged in the cake, right? They want the sugar. But I'm engaged in the kids. I love them, so I smile at them. They smile at the cake. But the key thing is, over here we have a little girl, and she's shy, right? And she doesn't want to participate, but she's already putting her finger in the mouth because she can taste the sugar, and she will eventually engage. And those are the dynamics that we're looking for in game design, and that's what makes our many games in the world more effective at engaging people than your standard tax form, if you get my drift. There's 5 aspects to engagement. One, ownership. You have to own the thing somehow, right? Transparency. You have to make it clear that what you're doing has an effect in the world, and specifically in the game itself. You want to have whatever you do increase the reputation both of your person and of the collective you're part of. You want it to be scalable, which is why we're talking so much about mobile media. You want to make sure that whatever you're developing can be used by many, and the instance copy, the instantiation of software is very easy. So scalability with cell phones is easy. But also separation. We have to make sure that whatever we're doing is separate from and specific to a certain purpose. And so that's why we have many different apps and not just one app that does everything. Here's another example that Professor Holston asked me to talk about earlier, which is a mode of engagement that doesn't work. This is a broken mirror. It's a mirror that has been tagged with graffiti. And so it's been tagged just so that I can see the trees waving in the wind, but I can't see the cars approaching from the other side. So this is a false mode of engagement. There's many of those as well that give us a feeling that we're engaging something meaningful, but we actually aren't. So that's an important test to make, that we're engaging in devices that produce true engagement. Here's one project. Robbie, why don't you please stand up? Here's one project we wanted to talk about briefly that's been done. Come here. That's been happening in thanks. That's been happening in relationship to EBALTSI, the East Bay Local Asian Development Corporation, that is located in Oakland, and there's a group of seniors who live there, and they have never touched computers. They are seniors that live in the United States since about 20 years, and how would you rate their literacy with digital media when we started?
They were, some of them had never touched computers. They didn't. We kind of had to teach them the basics of, like, this is a keyboard, this is a mouse, you need to move the mouse. And it was also challenging because many of them didn't know English.
That's right. So we worked with a translator and a Chinese national, Wenjing Huang, who came to join us as a transfer student. And she helped us translate a lot of stuff. And we had to come up with a game that did the basic transaction, the basic digital citizenship transaction, which is what? It's typing, right? And so we had to develop this game. And here we have a senior looking a little bit confused. Here we have Shop Type, the game that you and your team developed. And this is its current version, so you can go look at it, trackfx.org/shoptype. What happens here?
So first, the user enters a username. That's later used to create a ranking at the end.
Right. And then the thing we discovered is that the seniors didn't speak much and didn't interact much with the city in a linguistic way, but they certainly went shopping every day. So we knew that the shopping metaphor was an effective metaphor, and so we made this shop type game that allowed them to type stuff that they wanted to get off the shelf, and when they typed the name of it, it fell into their shopping carts. And they liked that very much, so that they were suddenly very engaged, right? This is a photo of them working together with students. In fact, one of our students, are you still here? Who's in that picture? No. Anyways, one of our students is there administering the game and observing how it works, and so we have some data that shows how the learning curves took off. What do the learning curves look like?
They generally increase, although there's for each individual there's a bit of error, but in general they increase.
Right. So we had an increase of like 4 characters per minute over like half an hour of gameplay or something like that on average. But some people don't get better, and that's one of the mysteries of games. Games don't solve all problems, right? And but we can look at that and really assess what is actually happening instead of just promoting that it's great and will solve everything. We have this metric approach that will tell us exactly how well things work and which things work better than others. So then the idea is to go back and design it and fix it. Here it is. Here's an example. Here you type crackers, and the cracker box will fall into your shopping cart. And of course it's bilingual, so that our students, who were lifelong learning students, learned how to type the English word for rice as well as Chinese. So thank you, Robbie. Let's give him a round of applause. He spent hours. Okay, next we're going to talk about another game called Pathways, which has a different story. Please come up, Chen and Jan. Yes, I'll shake your hand. Thank you. Shake your hand too. There we go. This is very important. So what we're doing here? What are we doing here? First of all, what's the history of this? One of our students had a mother who had a brain operation, brain surgery, and her left hemisphere was damaged, and she had to do all these games in therapy sessions to regain her ability to move her right hand, because the left hemisphere was damaged. And so we thought maybe we can make an app that she can take home and that she can engage with her friends. So how does that work? What is this app that we have now?
Well, I'm not that student whose mother had the...
You're not that student. Oh, you're the second generation, right?
Yeah. So we came into this project this semester, so we kind of just redeveloped it. So as you can see, it's actually a remodeling of the classic pegboard test, and so you kind of just, I don't know if you guys can see it, but we kind of wanted to show you how it worked by kind of doing it here. But so we added player options, so you could have you could write your name here, and then you'd move it over, and then it would keep track of your score. And basically, the application is meant to test your fine motor skills as well as help you develop them. So if you had experienced any brain injuries or anything that would affect your brain cortex, then it could help you sort of like a therapy, like a game therapy.
Right, and the point is that you can, many games are very broad and very imprecise, but one thing we're very happy about is that if you push this button here, the game slides over, and then you know which hand is playing. Of course, now we're cheating because we're playing together. But you know which hand is playing the game and which hand is just holding down the button. So like that, you know for sure which part of the brain is being used to produce the test. Now, in terms of coding, what were the challenges you were facing here? Chen, you brought this from its previous state to its current state, and it's now available at the App Store, which is very nice. It's TikTok tiles, and those of you who have codes on your cards, on your name tags, can get it for free. Those are free download codes, so check your card for a strange-looking code here. So what was the challenge?
Sure. I mean, definitely, like, what I think, like, was really great about having it on an iPad is that, like, unlike just a Purdue Pegboard test, it's that you don't have just a board that's preset. Now, in our case, we have, like, multiple levels.
Right.
And so in programming, we could take that into account. We could, like, figure out how to expand and, like, be able to create, like, more than just, like, one pegboard, but, like, different levels of pegboard that test, like, different levels of function.
Right. And so our plan is now to expand this and to have many more games involved. And we're right now with Dr. Farzin, who was going to be here today but couldn't join us because of a family emergency. We're going to test this in a clinical setting. And you're looking forward to that, right?
Yes.
Yeah. What kind of potential do you see for this in the future?
Well, I've done some research about how it could perhaps help with patients who have experienced post-concussive symptoms, and patients with autism spectrum disorder, in terms of fine motor skills and enhancing those, as well as improving ambidexterity, among other functions of motor skills.
So it's both diagnostic and therapeutic, because an autism spectrum disorder person might use this in a very different way than somebody else, and we could probably tell from the game data if there is some kind of condition present or not. So good. Let's give them a round of applause for putting in the time to make this happen.
Is that app available for purchase on download on iTunes?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, it is.
It's
okay.
TikTok tiles, and we'll bring it up in a moment. I just want to mention one other game that we're developed that's going to take just a couple minutes to talk about. This is with Professor Bill Satariano, and we're going to talk about who's here in the room.
Participating in the afternoon session.
And he's going to explain more about walking and the impacts of walking on health. But the idea is here to create a bingo game, again, something that seniors are familiar with, and expand its meaning so that you now play bingo in the city and running around in the city instead of sitting down. And this is us testing our game. And I'm showing this picture mostly because it shows how we play test games. The process is to write a piece of code, see if it works, run around, and go back in the lab and iterate on it. So we're doing this play testing, and oftentimes play testing with the actual target audiences to see if we can optimize the gameplay and keep engagement high and increase the holding power of the media. Good. So here's a list of ongoing projects, but I'm going to give the word back to James. So there's one more project to talk about.
So Greg and I are going to talk about two projects that we're working on now. One is called City Sandbox, and the other is called Poning Asthma. And I'm going to talk about the former briefly. Can we get that up?
Yeah.
Okay. City Sandbox is a project that we have released in a very limited closed beta version, and we're very happy to have three of our Polish comrades here with whom we are working these are city activists and scholars and researchers who are going to use this program and help us develop it in the field. We had a great session yesterday getting their feedback and mostly criticisms about what was missing, and it has been very productive to have this sort of project. We've also been working, I think you could use, you're going to do it live? They solved it here. You're going to do it live?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll do it live. City Sandbox is an app designed to help people interrogate their cities. And I think what distinguishes from some other things, like maybe Fix My Street, that kind of app, is that we're also developing it as a tool for activists, for those who have that extra motivation to. Well, don't show the whole story yet. Go back to it. Yeah, go back to the first page, please. Yeah, thanks. So, City Sandbox is organized around 4 ideas. Ask, discuss, challenge, organize. And that's what we want people to do with this. And we expect that people in Berkeley will use it. We're playtesting it here. We've been working a bit with Councilman Wozniak, who is here and going to speak a bit later. And we hope that in this iteration we'll work a bit more. We want people to ask, discuss, challenge, and organize. So you can enter. Actually, before he logged on, it said here, enter a city. You can travel around the world and look at what people have done. I mean, now they haven't done anything because it hasn't been released, but hopefully they will. So you can type in Berkeley. So let's go to Berkeley and see what we have. So it's color-coded by questions, challenges, and events. And you can sort by a whole series of things. So what we decided was that City Sandbox is in many ways about people recognizing that they're not alone in their questions. You know, they walk to the office every day past an abandoned lot, and they wonder, why is that lot abandoned? Why is there no bus service in my neighborhood? You know, why this, why that? Why are the public schools failing? Why did the library shut down? And this is an opportunity to ask those kinds of questions. And then it would be an opportunity for an activist to have a project, or a group to have a project, to pose a challenge and rally support for it and see what the depth of that particular priority is. So in Poznan, I'm hoping, in Poznan, where Kacper's from, we're hoping to use it to test it in the project of participatory budgeting in a couple of neighborhoods. Because this seems to be the kind of app that would be very useful for that. Now, here's a question. Why is the commercial lot at Telegraph and Hesse empty, fenced off, and apparently abandoned? And you can see you can do some things with it. You could follow this. We decided to ask participants to categorize their questions. So we have rights and dignity, public space, safety, commerce, because we think it's important for people to understand that part of the construction of politics is fitting it into categories of collective interest. Now, you can add a response, so let's look at the response. I think there was a fire on that lot, and it was never rebuilt. And then you can create, here's a description of the initial question, but then you can create a challenge. Let's click on the challenge. And this punch, this is the code and the alias of someone who posed this challenge, created a challenge. What would be a great use for this abandoned lot at a central Berkeley location? Let's gather some proposals, discuss, and vote on them. So establish a submission deadline. It'll end on the 12th. And people can then upload Let's Build a Garden with a public sculpture and put it up there. And now, all of these things will populate spatially. That is to say, will be represented on the map. And the map view, we haven't looked at that yet, but the map view represents all of this spatially. And let's just move to the last one. Well, Greg is...
I'm inspired.
He's inspired. And then what you can do after people can vote on these, and then there can be an event in which people will collect the 5 best proposals and take them to Gordon Wozniak and say, Councilman, this is what we've got. There's real citizen support for this. Let's do something. And I think that from my conversations with Councilman Wozniak, knowing the depth of citizen interest is really important. It's a crowdsourced problem, and this is a tool for that. There's a whole lot more to say about this. One of the things that we heard from our Polish friends yesterday was of the importance of designing in many new features. The ability for users to separate out specific areas, to designate specific areas in a neighborhood, to produce layers of different projects. So an activist, an NGO in Poznan or Warsaw can have a project about bike lanes, or participatory budgeting, or repairing infrastructure, or evaluating cultural events, and be able to identify that project and have people log into the site specifically interested in that project. We're going to introduce a notification and subscription system so that people can mark what they're interested in and be notified, or follow and be notified. So this is the Social Apps Lab will spend the next, till March. We'll be working on the closed beta version. Then we're going to open the beta version to try to scale it up and see where it breaks and receive some better ideas in this collaborative process. Thanks.
We're done?
Honing asthma.
Honing asthma. Okay, so we have one more project we're going to talk about that was supported by CITRIS and is in development right now. One of the big challenges in healthcare is asthma. Asthma has been increasing by some 160%, more and more cases every year, particularly in the places of Oakland and of Fresno. And we've been very fortunate to put together a team of artists and engineers who develop a game that is supposed to teach children from age 11 onwards how to understand the dynamics of pollution, asthma pollution, triggers, and wind and personal exposure. So more and more we know, for example, that a city like Fresno has a certain rate of asthma patients. We know pretty precisely how many patients there will be at any given time. What we don't know is who is going to be that patient. And so this is more of a matter of probability than one of cause and effect. So this is a very hard thing for people to parse, especially if they feel like they're a victim of a disease. And so we wanted to give them a game in which they can visualize themselves as active participants in their exposure rate. And so in the game, a young child is going to find out that there's a new kind of crop drone that sprays insecticides onto crops at night when nobody's checking, and this kind of crop drone is causing new kinds of pollution that affect this player. And so it's an adventure game, it's anime styled, it's going to be very beautiful, and it is also most significantly tied to actual wind patterns. So when you play the game at a given date, like October 1st, and then with contributions from Inez Fung, we have exact wind dynamics calculated to see if a pollutant is released at that day, how it will affect that city, and particularly the specific location that the game player is in. The game player is always in a part of the city of Fresno. And we hope to test that game with 4 types of user groups and then see how we need to develop it to make it more effective for the entire state of California, so that there can be a dialogue about asthma by both patients and non-patients, and hopefully a dialogue that leads to the adjustment of policies that will make it so that, for example, oil tankers idling in the port of Oakland don't cause an increase in asthma patient admissions in the hospital, in the children's hospital. I also want to acknowledge Susan Miller, who's here, who's been helping us organize that particular project. So that's what we have. That's what we have for now, and you have one more thing to finish.
One more that I forgot to mention. You know, we talked about this morning, and here I think are examples of how we're trying to implement it. We talked about the difference between citizen and resident this morning, and it was in both City Sandbox and in Honing Asthma. what we're trying to do is recognize that so many productive members of our community are not citizens and are excluded from the public sphere, the official public sphere. And so what City Sandbox does, and Poning Asthma, is at least we're trying to provide a virtuous public sphere in which people can participate with some notion of security and contribute the knowledge and the experience that they have to the solution of city and health problems. So with that, we'll bring our presentation to a close, and we'll ask the participants of the roundtable, we'll set up some chairs here to come up for the next phase of the midday presentations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me just briefly introduce everyone. We're going to be now. Paul Wright, the director of CITRIS, had to be in Phoenix today. A legal issue, and he had to represent the university, and he expresses his regrets that he can't join us, and his great support for this venture. So, but who we do have is Steve DeMello, who is the director of healthcare at Berkeley CITRIS, and he's going to begin the round table. And then Dean Carla Hesse, Dean of Social Sciences, the Associate Dean Catherine Carson, and our Councilman Gordon Wozniak from District 8 will carry the banner.
All right, Steve, let's give him a welcome. You're on.
I'm on. Welcome, everybody. My role for today is to really talk about two things. One is a very couple brief comments about why CITRIS as a whole has been interested in supporting the social apps and the development work. And then the second is to take you a little bit more deeply into one specific area, which is health and healthcare. The general interest of CITRIS in the entire area of social apps and data and democracy really comes back to one central issue for us, which is we have a charge of developing technologies and services that have social impact. What we've learned over the last few years is that in order to have any sort of sustainable impact, whether it's in healthcare, energy, any other discipline that we're working in, we really have to be able to bring together 4 key groups of stakeholders and get them to work cooperatively. Beginning with us as a university in developing technologies and processes, working with the business community who can develop products and services off that research, government in their setting of policy and delivery of service to the community, and in many ways, most importantly, consumers and the public as a participant in collecting data that's important for design, as a participant in the policy discussion, and in using the services themselves. And one of the reasons that we're so excited about working in this field is we think that social apps offer one great opportunity in one place for a limited amount of money and technology to bring those groups together and create the kind of solutions that they can all participate in. My particular area of work here at CITRIS is in healthcare, and you've heard a lot about the different public health and private health applications that have been developed so far by the Social Apps Lab. You've probably also noticed more generically that the U.S. healthcare system is a mess. That's the bad news. The worst news is if you wait a few years, it's going to get a lot worse. And the primary reason for that is 3 sets of dynamics that are working against us simultaneously. First is the aging of the population. The second is the combination of aging and our lifestyle and social decisions, which is producing a much greater level of chronic disease of all types throughout our communities. And finally, at the same time that demand is going up because of aging and disease, we have the most difficulties and the most challenges in trying to provide people who have the skills to provide the services to support them. So that at exactly the same time that we have growing demand, we have reducing supply. What that says to us is that we don't need incremental improvement. We need fundamental transformation within the industry and fundamental transformation within the service. And what that looks like for healthcare are 5 big differences. The first is the ability to move from working only with individuals and treating one person at a time to being able to work with groups of individuals who share a common disease, a common question, or a common problem. The second is that rather than just treating in institutions, we have to find ways to treat people in their homes, in their communities, both individually and collectively. Instead of depending, as we do now, on the notion that only licensed professional caregivers make an impact on health, we have to be in a position where our family members, ourselves, our friends, and other people in the community can participate directly in the process of care. Instead of accepting fragmentation as the rule, everybody has their own record system, everybody's keeping their own information, nobody's sharing or designing together, we have to move to a place where we can integrate our information and integrate the development of new services. And finally, instead of using technology to support the current delivery process, we really need a set of technologies that will disrupt the existing processes. And for us in healthcare, we think social apps provide a way of attacking all 5 of these issues, helping make the transition in all 5 of those cases. First, by being highly scalable, so that we can move from working with individuals to larger and larger groups and provide the service at low incremental cost. The second is that we can make tools and services that are useful in all environments, particularly community settings, particularly the home, and not just institutions. That we're able to involve all stakeholders, especially consumers, in both the design and the delivery of services. That social apps, because they bring people together and because they have a central data element, provide a great vehicle to be able to integrate, to be able to bring together the stakeholders, the different types of information, to one place in a useful way that can lead to successful development. And finally, most important, is it gives us a great opportunity to disrupt what is right now a very personal, very costly, very resource-intensive process, and offer some new ways for people to experience healthcare and experience health services and information. There has been developing over the past 3 to 4 years some really excellent clinical and other information that demonstrates just how valuable social applications in general and gaming in particular can be for healthcare. And probably the first study that interested and engaged a lot of people was work done about 3 years ago by a company called Hope Labs that was interested in working with children who had cancer and in helping figure out what the best way was to educate and motivate them to participate in their own care and help improve their outcomes. What they developed was a game for adolescent cancer victims that was based on a first-person shooter notion, a classic video game. And what they wanted to learn at the end of their research was, did the game and did use of the game have any significant impact on how people experienced care and their outcomes from their care? And what they found was that as a result of playing the game, matching people who had played the game and undergone treatment against people who hadn't, 3 important substantive benefits came out. The first was that patients were more likely to comply with both the treatment support that they were being asked for by their doctor and the things they needed to do on their own to support their treatment. And by complying, they got better results. The second was they had a higher level of knowledge about their condition, about their treatment, and what they needed to do. And the third, and in some ways the most important, was when asked how they felt about their own effectiveness in understanding their disease, managing their own care, and participating in their care, we saw a great increase in people's ability and confidence to both understand what was happening to them and to be able to participate actively in that care. And as we've seen further work develop, we think really these 3 items form the basic value that can come from social apps in healthcare. If you can find a way to help people first gain knowledge of their condition, of the social issues surrounding it, and of the treatment and the options for taking care of them. If you can secondly help them with compliance, both complying with things that providers and professionals ask them to do, but also compliance with things that they control entirely themselves, their own self-care process. And third, if you can build self-efficacy, the feeling that they're competent now, but that they're going to be competent to take on new challenges and do extra work for themselves over time, if you can put those 3 pieces together, knowledge, compliance, efficacy, you have a really great opportunity to be able to improve people's health status, both individually as well as collectively. So to close, we think there are 4 important messages here. The first is that social apps provide a great opportunity to bring together key stakeholders to make social change. The second is that healthcare faces large, ugly problems. They're going to get worse before they get better. And social apps provides a really terrific vehicle to get at those 4 or 5 different ways in which the healthcare system needs to fundamentally change. And finally, there's building evidence, both clinical and managerial, that people who can participate in social apps, that people that can play games, use this technology, will be able to do a better job of learning what they need, feeling confident that they can execute it, and getting better clinical results. Thank you.
Next speaker is... Who is our next speaker?
We were going to organize this as a round table too. So don't feel that you need to stand at the podium. That was Steve's stuff. But if you want to stay there and talk about the project and interdisciplinarity and city, university, and history, whatever moves you, that would be great.
Great. So I think I can talk from here. We seem well mic'd. I'm Carla Hesse. I'm the Dean of Social Sciences, and I'm thrilled to be a part of this and thrilled to have been helpful in making it happen. When Jim and Greg came to see me, I just immediately said yes, and for several reasons. The first has to do with my own intellectual work, which I don't even think they know has something to do with the subjects that they're grappling with, particularly with the more political question, the we part of the digital, but the intersection between technology and politics. That was the beginning of my own research as a historian. I work on the history of printing and freedom of the press in the French Revolution, which was a moment of a major reorganization or resocialization of the primary communication technology of that time period. So I've thought a lot about these issues in an earlier setting, and that is one reason I'm interested in it, and it makes me both a skeptic and an enthusiast for what they're doing, and I mean those both in the most generous sense. And the second reason I was interested in this is because I think we're at a moment in which, precisely because of what's been happening in the world of information technology, there is an interesting challenge in front of us as a campus about the relationship between the world of engineering and the world of the proliferation of, through digital and electrical technologies, information explosion and the challenges for social scientists of dealing with information. In our part of the campus landscape, we went from a world, especially as a historian, when there was too little information. Information was very hard to acquire. And so one of the biggest challenges for really centuries has been acquiring information, not the new challenge that we see in front of us, which is facing the problem of too much information. And so trying to grapple with that is something that I think compels historians and computer scientists to come together again and to talk about, how we meet this real transformation in what the relationship is between information and the major challenges of our social and political world. So let me start with the skeptical part of me, which comes from the 18th century. Imagine this quote from a great mathematician. People thought democracies were only possible on a small scale. That it would not be possible to mount a republic in a large scale because once you lose face-to-face contact, it's impossible for citizens to be present to one another. And therefore, no political philosopher from the ancient world to the 18th century thought it was possible to have a large republic. We are now citizens in a moment in which we can mount a large republic. Why? Thanks to the printing press, which makes it possible for all of France, the great mathematician I'm speaking of is Condorcet, all of France to be in a single conversation with itself. He says this in 1791. And he's an incredibly inventive man. He declared he was a great advocate for the freedom of the press, deregulation of censorship, decentralization of printing technology, putting a printing press in every home, a social app in everybody's pocket. And he created, he was involved with a group called the Social Circle, a metaphor that you've used today, the Cercle Social. It was a social circle, and its idea was to sponsor new uses of printing technology to bring France into a single conversation with itself, very much in the spirit of a digital we. And they used really inventive forms of print genre to try to do this. The single most important and relevant to this conversation was something called the bouchée de fer, the iron mouth. Not unlike the torpedo idea, his idea was for an iron mouth. Well, what did he mean by an iron mouth? It was the mail slot, like the iron box where you slip a letter in it. And the idea was to produce a newspaper that had no editorial function at all. You would simply, it was a newspaper called the bouchée de fer, or the iron mouth, that was just printed letters that citizens dropped in the slot of the mailbox in Paris. Anyone could do it, and then they spread this to different cities of France. Anyone could just leave your letters in that mailbox, and all their job was to do was to print them and spread them. Now, never mind the financial model and the economic model, which had to do with patrons like deans of social sciences and wealthy aristocrats. But, so we'll leave aside the commercial, the commerce side of your comment for a moment. But they printed letters from citizens, like a city sandbox. Sorry, guys, tout ça change. So this is the skeptic part of me, which is to say a lot of what seems new is, I think, a product of the fact that when you introduce a technology, many of the social relationships that have been encoded in older technologies just become more opaque. They become more visible to us. So that much of what we see in the digital revolution is, to me, not really revolutionary. It's just become more visible to us again. Things that were implicit, choices that were made, and which are really political and social choices, take on the appearance of being technological choices, when in fact they're just choices about how we choose to arrange our lives and organize them with one another. So a lot of the genre revolutions that we think of as being a consequence of the introduction of digital technologies are rather have become visible. Things that we thought of as almost naturalized into our world of communication have simply become more visible and have become apparent to us as choices that were made, in fact, 200 years ago or longer ago, but seem suddenly to be choices when they had a certain kind of taken for grantedness. Arrangements for how we communicate with one another, and even laws and regulatory infrastructure that have shored up those arrangements, seem to be limits of a technology when in fact they were the products of a set of social negotiations and political processes about how we want to organize communication amongst ourselves. So the bouchée de fer was a colossal failure, actually, because citizens didn't really care what each other thought. And the fact of the matter is that only when somebody starts to say, who's got the right answer to why that lot is vacant, do we start to have a real conversation. I happen to know why that lot is vacant, and I'm sure you do too. But most of the people who answered that didn't know the answer. So when does information become good information or useful information or worthwhile information? That's when politics actually begins. So I guess I would put back as my questions or challenges to this team, one, what are the ethical choices that are embedded in the games themselves and embedded in the notion of actor or agency in the games? And two, what are the set of choices and who makes them about the editorial functions that you felt compelled to impose? You create a classification like commerce. You're not generating those out of aggregated choices made by people. Are not self-classifying. You're saying commerce, leisure, all of, a nice set of categorizations, like an encyclopedia, that, have been the editorial functions of many media for many years, going back really to the Babylonian tablets and the first efforts to aggregate information. So I guess what I want to say is there are many of the really challenging questions that seem to be to become visible in a new technological environment are the effects either of those decisions that have been implicit in our organization of knowledge and now look more opaque to us, decisions that we made implicitly about citizenship, about authority, about who has capacity, about the distribution of information technology and its social organization, whether it's copyright or censorship or libel law or, which are all questions that I fully expect you will encounter and already have. I'm thinking registering an app with iTunes. You're in that world, the commerce part of that world, but you will probably, as City Sandbox goes on, enter into all sorts of other things having to do with libel and censorship, and so forth. So there's going to the real story for me is down the road a little bit about what are the ethical choices in terms of using game theory as opposed to other ways of animating or motivating people. And then finally, a lot of the crowdsourcing idea seems to me to be valuable information only to people who are statistically literate. So the individual may be able to self-monitor, but the really valuable information you're getting from crowdsourcing is actually only of value to people who are epidemiologists. It's not information that's valuable at the level of an individual. It doesn't empower the individual. It empowers us as a society to better deploy our health assets. I'm completely persuaded by most of the literature on that. But it's not empowering the individual. So what is the relationship between the ethics and the technology, and what are the implicit sets of decisions that you've either debated and made decisions about explicitly or haven't really fully examined in, let's say, motivating somebody for an instrumental outcome, like taking better care of themselves or helping you to solve dengue fever, and the kinds of implied actors and an implied set of regulatory and legal infrastructure that actually enables social acts to operate in a broader political and sociological environment. I think I could stop there, but what I want to say about the French Revolution is that the first, and I'll just stop with the moral of my story, which is that the first impulse during the revolution was to free printing up. Information wants to be free. To free it up and put the tools of communication into the hands of the people. And what it produced was actually commercial and political disaster. And the second half of the French Revolution was all about re-regulating, re-socializing information technologies to produce a kind of citizenship that held individuals accountable for what they said, that held that created a commercial infrastructure that made it possible for good knowledge rather than bad knowledge to get into print, whether it was through government patronage or in some cases through censorship, like of cookbooks, the last thing to be censored, because selling poisonous recipes was not a good idea, or pharmaceuticals. There was lots of bad knowledge out there that killed people because the collapse of censorship also meant the collapse of a regulatory infrastructure that had massive public health consequences. So the moral of the sort of techno-utopian story in the French Revolution was re-regulation of information technology, but along new and more democratic lines rather than autocratic lines. So social science is at the center, I think, of your story. But the real challenges of it, I think, have yet to present themselves in this new social app environment.
Thank you. Did you just generate this whole speech while you were listening to us? It's very impressive.
Yeah.
Next, we are going to go...
No, dear, don't pull up.
No, don't pull up the slide?
No.
Okay.
That's okay, you can.
Because it will make clear that I'm a historian, too.
And
That's okay.
I think we
very
will
diverse
just
way.
each speak from where we are. I'm a historian, not of the 18th century, but of the 20th and 21st. I'm a historian of science and technology, and I want to give some reflections in a somewhat similar vein to Carla was doing, but from the two places where my experience intersects, I hope, with that of those of you in the room. One is working as the chair of the design team for the Social Sciences Data Laboratory, which is getting going on campus as a place where social scientists will be interfacing with many of the same worlds of information and data that is part of the world that you live in. The other is as a collaborator of engineers myself. I've been working with colleagues in nuclear engineering for 3-4 years now on a project that we call social science literacy for nuclear engineers. If you can imagine that. We started this well before Fukushima. And I want to start from those two positions of where I am to offer some reflections, and I think what I really want to do is pose some questions to those of you who are part of the Social Apps Lab to reflect with me on your experience and think about how the kinds of projects that you're involved in raise questions for the university and for the conduct of research and teaching in a place like Berkeley. So one set of questions for me that I'm going to put out to you centers around the venues, D-Lab or the Social Apps Lab, where we build up exchanges between technical folks and social science folks. I would be very interested to hear the reflections of the students, the faculty, the community participants around the construction of that conversation. How is it that the student who comes into the project, who works on one of the apps that is being developed within the Social Apps Lab, navigates that terrain between the technical and the social? In my own experience, I think about this profoundly, sitting in rooms of nuclear engineers who are struggling with how they develop the language, the concepts, the fluency with the basic operations of the social world. And I wonder how that plays out, almost ethnographically I'm asking you here, how that plays out for the participants in the Social Apps Lab. Is the experience itself of being involved in the lab a kind of education in exchange and conversation? I think about that also from the perspective of someone working on the data laboratory, because we're trying to think through ways in which social scientists can productively engage with computer scientists or statistics professors or students around common problems of analyzing data, mining data, networking data, visualizing data. How do we build these spaces such as you have done here and such as we're trying to do in the D-Lab or such as I'm trying to do with my colleagues in nuclear engineering? How do we build the spaces where each of us can come from our own disciplinary background, technical or social, to condense it here, and actually connect with each other, rather than have one form of discourse dominate, instead a place where conversations can take place. So that's my first question. How do we build these venues? How do we structure them so that they, in fact, do the work that we hope from them from? And the second question reflects further on that theme. How do those conversations, those exchanges, in fact, shape how we operate as researchers and teachers and learners? Do our own practices and identities as practitioners of these disciplines change through being in these interactions? I see that profoundly when I work with nuclear engineers, that my own way of dealing with things has changed. I give different kinds of PowerPoint presentations. I give different kinds of explanations. I do not see yet that the nuclear engineers' approach changes that much from being in interaction with me. And one of the questions I want to pose to the Social Apps Lab is, have the technical people coming into this conversation in fact, found their practices or their ways of thinking changed? Or has it been the social scientists and the humanities folks adapting to the world of the engineers of the technology side? Because watching your presentations like I watched the nuclear engineers, this seemed to me much more of an engineering style of venue. And so I pose the question to you, is there a way in which the social scientific or humanistic background that you bring to this, those of you who come from that, is there a way that you see that affecting the practice and the thinking of those who come from another place? And the same question to those of you who come from that other place. Is this a place, is this a venue in which your actions and your thinking has changed? So being a historian, I hate to predict the future. I will not do that. But I would like to have some time at the end of this conversation. I will keep my remarks short so that we have a chance to have those discussions. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I want to make a few brief remarks, but then I'll actually show a specific example. In the interest of full disclosure, I'm actually a retired nuclear scientist, not a nuclear engineer. I did nuclear physics. But I'm interested in trying to convince the university to use the city of Berkeley as a social laboratory to try out new ideas and things. And when Jim and Greg came and talked about City Sandbox and the social act, I said, that's a really great idea. And I can give you a couple other examples. We've been working with Berkeley Consulting, which is an undergraduate group in Haas Business School that does studies, and they're looking at how we would get Wi-Fi around the city, either by extending the air barriers or creating free Wi-Fi for commercial development. I've also talked to one of the Goldman policy classes in terms of how we would get more student involvement, and they assigned it as a class project on actually involvement in getting input on development projects we have in the city. And I want to talk about one of the big problems we face, which is the social. As I said, I'm a physicist. People are much more complicated than electrons and subatomic particles because they're chaotic and they have self-determination and they don't always do what you expect them to do. And I think one of the problems with government, we have a lot of cynicism. People feel not engaged, and I think the solution, at least on the local level, is actually more engagement. It may be inconvenient for the administrators and the politicians sometimes, but I think it actually will give us a governed body or body politics that will feel more engaged and more than happy with the decisions. They'll understand how they're made. And the example is this open town hall forum, which was started by a UC graduate student about 4 years ago, and we've used fairly extensively. And one of the problems as a politician is that if you talk to other people who think like you basically get your thinking reinforced. We have meetings where we have to make many decisions. Typically, we have like 30 items or so on a council agenda. People will come out and speak to the meetings. Typically, there are one or two. If it's a hot item or there's an activist group behind it, we may get 20 or 30. Unusually, sometimes we even get 100 people. But we have a city with 112,000 people in Berkeley, so we hear from a tiny, tiny fraction. One of the reasons is many of the professionals, both, if there's a couple, they got kids, they're professionals, they don't have the time to sit for several hours in a public meeting. So one of the ways is try to broaden the input from the body public by making it easier for them to comment, and using a web tool, but also to make it a civil tool that, you don't get these flame wars like you get often if you go to blogs and newspaper articles where anybody can comment. And then also we have to satisfy the First Amendment rules that we have to allow everybody to comment. So they came up with something, this tool called Open Town Hall, where you can also allow a citizen to be anonymous. So if they don't feel comfortable using their name, if they want to say something critical about the city, they can say it anonymously. They have to register. They don't have to be a citizen. They have to give an address, okay? So you don't multiple vote. And we post items that the council is going to make a decision on. It's going to come up on the council agenda with the technical background reports in a neutral manner, not an advocacy saying, we want you... this is, you should support this. And what we found is we actually get something like an order of magnitude more people participating in this online forum, okay? It's very useful. You can scroll down and you can see all the comments. People can actually say whether they like a comment or they found a comment helpful, somebody's arguments. They can just simply say they're for something or against it, or maybe they can give the reasons. And we have a very intelligent population in Berkeley. They'll spend 10 or 15 minutes writing you a detailed response with some very thoughtful information in it, where they don't have the 2 hours to come and sit in, at a public meeting. Okay, and so you actually get a broad perspective of input. And I find when I read these things, I learn a lot. Okay, and I hear from people with ideas that. And it can also change my thinking many times on this. And so let me give you just a couple of examples. Berkeley has a foreign policy. Let's do the foreign policy one, which was the Guantanamo one, if you can bring that up. All the people, we had about 20 or so people come out in public comment. They were activists. They wanted us to take a stand, and one part of it was to rehabilitate some prisoners in Guantanamo and Berkeley. Okay, and they were essentially 98% of the people who spoke were in favor of this. But the online comment was just the opposite. We had 170 people participate. It was like 2 to 1 against. Okay, so it's not a scientific poll. It's just information. But we had a much larger number of people come online and give their opinion. So that's something the council can take into consideration in their deliberations. We provide a feedback loop. And the other interesting is actually you can see there's comments over here. There are 182 from Berkeley. There were some from outside of Berkeley. You can actually, if we elect council people by districts, you can actually look at people who voted for, or who participated from your district, whether they were for or against it. Okay, and that's sometimes that proximity. When it's around a development project, you will see difference. The city as a whole, there will be one opinion, but near where something is located, it may be a very different opinion, and that proximity from the site is actually interesting. And if you go to the West Berkeley one, we're trying to get some research and development in West Berkeley. The city's interested in environmental green tech, and the zoning is for manufacturing, classical heavy-duty manufacturing. It's, R&D was not allowed. There was a big fuss about changing. We were spending a couple of years actually looking at the zoning. And one of the questions we asked is when we had a proposal for some zoning changes, one is to allow research and development, it is what people thought about it. It was very interesting. Citywide, is this here's the question, should the city of Berkeley adopt a zoning amendment to allow some changes to protect space, which was basically allow research and development into some areas, okay? And again, it was the body public overall was in favor of this, but if you looked at the district in West Berkeley where down there was cited, there was actually significant opposition. And you could, down here, you can't see it very well, but they actually give the breakdown within a district. And this is very useful for a council person to know that, if you're, even if something citywide, people are in favor, it is people in your district oppose it, okay? And that's often the issue around development. There's local detriment, even if there's general good. And you have to weigh that when you make a decision. And so things like this that have a geocoding that can tell you even the distance can be very, very helpful. So there's many, many, many topics here. There's actually a lot of data there if someone wants to actually look at it. But we provide a closure in the end. We actually say what the city decided, so people can go back and look and see what happened. And with the virtue of this, we get a lot of communications by email. I can see all the email traffic of what people said. Here, you can see what your neighbors and other people said. Okay, you may not know who exactly said it, but you can see, and you may be in the minority on some issue, and some people don't. Sometimes they say, no, I'm right, and you should do this. And you can say, well, look, 2/3 of the people want to do it the other way. And, when council makes a decision, it has to take that into consideration. Not only what's maybe right, but what really the body public thinks. And so I think tools like this, anything that can get more and the public involved. And if you look at the satisfaction survey that we have associated with this, it's 95% positive. People really appreciate being asked their opinion on something and knowing in the end whether it made a difference. they're very appreciative of being asked for their opinion, and they're very appreciative actually of what other people say. And, you get nice comments of people saying, "Gee, this really helped my understanding of why, what this issue is all about." And I think tools like this to get more citizen engagement, make it easy so they can do it from their home. They don't have to come to these meetings and wait, our way to improve our democracy. So, thank you.
So we have some time for discussion and questions and comments. And so I think we should do that. I guess field some questions in here. So, thank you. So, some comments, questions? Yes, Arthur.
So, I'd like to comment the speech of Carla Hesse, and I'd like to say that I share a lot of worries about the new technologies, new games, new applications that we can use to make people more engagement in the communities. But of course, internet is it's nothing new. But if people really would like, to join, take a part of process of participation, so they just simple come to the meeting, and just they would be interesting in what are the council member do, what the a member of parliament are doing. So, but we know that the world is changing, and of course, like Google Books comes the books to our computer, and for me, I don't have to go to the library of Berkeley to find particle books, and I use Google Books to do that, or any other services. That kind of thing, the application like City Sandbox or other applications are very useful, to make it easier to people who are just, concerned about situation, just to give a word. And of course, this is not a representative way that, just individual make some comments, ask some questions, or NGO propose some projects and use Citizen Box or other application to carry on that project. But still, as I know from the Polish experiences, we met at June in this year at Poznan, and it was the first meeting of Polish organization interesting about cities. And we discovered that we have very local problems who are very similar to each other cities. And in comparison, if I'm living in single district, this particular district, and I have local problems, and I just make some post in Citizen Box about that problems, that it's particular for me. So probably, maybe in other district there will be some people who has experiences with the same problems. Yeah, of course, this is not some statistical information for the cities, or this is not a presentation. This is nothing that the council members should take very seriously. But if the council members are smart, they will see that it's something wrong because two people from this different district notice that same problem, and probably there's more people who suffering by that problem, and this is some kind of reason to just interesting in that interest to that problem, just to ask to organize some consultations. And this is why I think this application we should use, just to make easier, to make shorter the way between individual citizens to the groups. Because in Poland, if we have a very from I think 2 or 3 years, we have a lot of consultation process, participation process, but mainly the participants are from middle class, and we are looking, some way to connect, to invite people from working class, people who are excluded from the communities. And of course, this is a very hard job to do because people who are working all day, they come to the home and they don't want to go outside. So how to ask them? This is the question that we're dealing. And we need some application, some very short way, some easy way, to ask them. And of course, this is nothing new. This application, any application, and Facebook is also nothing new, but it makes our life easier. And maybe this will be useful for for this connection. Maybe not now, but maybe in 5 years, that will be very, very good way, to make people connect with each other. Thanks.
That's a very thoughtful set of comments, and I want to be very clear about a couple of things. I am an enthusiast as well as a skeptic, and the enthusiasm comes from exactly some of the things you talked about, the ease with which one has access to information, the ease with which one can communicate, and the accessibility that it makes possible. So, I think that brings with it new challenges as well, which is the excess of information and how one then begins to manage that problem, which is the way I preface my remarks. Let me say, though, I hope it was clear that I think that there is no question that microtechnologies are a very powerful way for citizens to self-organize in authoritarian situations. I mean, and that was true with the printing press in the 18th century, which was a theocratic state, authoritarian state. And the printing press and underground printing and publishing was a critical element, critical corrosive in bringing down that regime and transforming France into a democracy. So I am not a skeptic about the printing press nor about the power of digital technology. What I wanted to say, though, that I think there's a difference between technology making, it's less about what I would say the means of production than it is to me about the mode of production. That it's less about the tool itself than the mode in which the tool is being used. And that the really interesting and difficult choices begin to be made when we make that kind of a distinction. So it's one thing for citizens to be able to make people in authority more aware of their problems. That's one mode of communication. But another important function, which Jim invoked in his speech, it's another thing, and I heard it also being communicated in your remarks, to make citizens more visible to one another, which is different than making their concerns visible to people in authority who have the power to change things, which is to feel less, as he put it, less alone with your problem, to feel heard not just by your councilman, but by your neighbor. And those are different modes of communication, and they're different functions of the same technology, and they could even be different functions of the same app. I mean, the app could be functioning for both purposes. But for a social scientist, that's where the question gets interesting, is which of those purposes, how many of those purposes are being built into the functionality of the app, and what are the expectations that are built into the functionality of the app when you are creating it? What kinds of capabilities? Is it to make citizens more visible to one another, either independently of authority, or also at the same time and visible to authority at the same time? And sometimes one is more appropriate than the other. I mean, just to take the student movement of a few weeks ago, in speaking with students about it, there was a big movement to not use your Berkeley email address, to use Gmail. Well, I find that both touching and interesting. That is to say, there was a rumor going around that the police were scanning people's email. I don't believe, if we had that much money, we wouldn't be in the soup we're in. But what? Right. That may be making a virtue of circumstance. But on the other hand, they were giving themselves over to Google. And I appreciate what you're saying about Google Books, but it isn't free, and it isn't free to everybody. And it also exercises very important censorship functions in terms of what it scans and what it doesn't scan. So the devil is really in the details. I am very much in favor of a national digital public library. My teacher is the national advocate for this, Robert Darnton. But the really challenging, I guess, and you're probably hearing the same message here from the social scientists, the really challenging questions that we confront when we start talking about the we part of the digital are less technological challenges than they are social and political choices, and the challenges of how we make those social and political choices, whether it's about what kind of intellectual property regime we want to have, whether it's about the degree of public investment and how that public investment is organized, whether it's about censorship and libel laws and the relationship of regulatory frameworks. To take the very dumbed-down public health example that I gave, cookbooks and censorship. Should everyone be allowed to publish recipes when you have a population that you can't trust to understand that this one would be poisonous? Should we be exercising a regulatory function as we do with off-label prescription of drugs? So those kinds of questions are really not questions that are presented by the technology. They're questions that are presented by the possibilities that those technologies open up.
Can I add one piece to that, James?
Sure.
One of the things that really struck me as I was listening to your comments is, in a past life, I spent about 7 years running a large international online community platform. And one of the things we realized in doing that was for every hour that you spent on developing the app, actually producing the software, you spent about 10 hours to 20 hours in trying to manage the community and trying to set the rules and set the structure that would let people cooperate fully and where you could get the best value from it. And I think we're sort of an interesting place with the social apps work where the attention right now is on creating the app, but the real value is going to come from how do you operate the app, and operating the app is a much more of a social science question and a humanities question in a lot of ways than it is an engineering question, because it's much more about how you manage daily interaction. And I think with the work that these folks are doing, the apps are terrific. You're starting to find ways to work on the operations, but the real challenge over the next 5 years is coming up with a scheme where we learn how to really operate successfully and respectfully that technology that we've created, and that's a wholly different set of skills.
Can I just add a little rejoinder, which is a difference in the other direction, because I think I could be misunderstood. I don't think making these apps is easy. I think there is this sense that those of us who aren't computer engineers and computer scientists overestimate the ease. And I know I've spoken with Jim a lot about this. Like, man, it's hard work to make one of these things. It takes hours. And I know that many of the students and faculty in the room who work on that, the technical problems are immensely challenging. So I think there's a way in which both engineers and social scientists probably feel an underestimation of the amount of effort and work on both sides of that putative disciplinary divide. It's a very different kind of work. And there's a sort of sense that if I can just make the right widget, the world will see its beauty, truth, and value. And there's a sense on the social science side, which, the widget,
So that very discussion in this very room.
Yeah. And I think that's so the respecting of the complexity of the challenges. And I think Catherine's question was really important, which is how much does the dialogue change the actors who are engaged?
I just want to respond briefly just to that. I mean, if the apps that we presented seem not to show their social science, and in a way that's great. But there's a tremendous amount of social science in there and a tremendous amount of contribution from public health, for example, in the dengue. There's a tremendous amount of ethnography to understand how communities are organized, what their priorities are, how dengue, for example, in this case, appears, what are the possibilities of organizing a successful app, a use of any technology, of any intervention in a community. So I think that to answer your question about the influence, the social science provided two things in our work. One was the content, if you will, at least in City Sandbox and the dengue project. I'm including public health here in the social science. The story. the drama, the social categories, social relations, but it also provided a kind of sorting, a framing of the knowledge, some of which you see in terms of decisions that were made about how the knowledge and the relationships get sorted. And I think that was fundamental to the sorts of projects that we had. And whether we should make that more explicit or not is an interesting question. But that it's a bit transparent is, I think, a bit not so apparent is probably a good thing.
Yeah, I want to make a comment. I'm not sure how this fits into the social science or whatever, but one of the problems with the web now is it's very easy on many issues for people from all over to come and interact on something. What the web doesn't support so well is neighborhoods or blocks, and there was an attempt by our block to do something like that, but there's not the apps to sustain the little village we had, where people knew each other and supported each other and exchanged information of local interest, and could then collaborate with neighboring blocks or even on a larger scale, but not on the global or the national scale. And I think that's a real challenge, because with government and city services and things, these things are all on a local level. And there has to be a reason, like a killer app, that people will log into these sites and interact with their neighbors and exchange information, like not who's the best plumber, or who's available for babysitting, I'm going out of town, we dog sit, and all those other things. What about public safety and sharing information? And the city can play a role in doing that, but and Palo Alto is trying something on that basis with this R Block site. I don't know whether that'll work, but that's where I think is what's missing, to tie local citizens with their neighbors and be able then to address things up the chain to the government, exchange information laterally, but protected in that local web space, so where they can exchange information and we're not just bombarded with digital rain from too many people that we can't absorb all the information. Okay, you get consensus from neighborhoods and whatever. I think that's what would really be helpful with apps.
I was really fascinated by this idea of resocializing public discourse, and I was wondering if anyone in the room had any ideas of how we can create a culture of responsible citizenship in digital media.
Well, I mean, I don't want to talk too much, but one of the things that I've engaged in dialogue with Jim about is I think that, if I were a political theorist and I was sitting here, I would say that this is all based on a communitarian theory of citizenship. It's based on an idea that citizenship is exercised toward consensus building rather than conflict mediation. And so that the idea of a cooperative neighborhood is a great one, unless you have a very heterogeneous neighborhood where people profoundly disagree with one another and don't recognize a we between each other. And part of the reason, so that the idea that we can build normative understandings of how we want to move forward is, I think, an attractive one. But it is an incomplete, I think, way of understanding politics, because the reason we have political rules is because we assume that people are not going to agree with one another. In fact, much of what politics is about, as our councilman can tell us, is conflict mediation between groups who are never going to agree, and yet must find ways to live with one another. So it has more of a mediating function. And that's where the civil part of public discourse, I think, comes in. So, and some people see that as censorship. Putting up chilies or not letting people use certain kinds of words. And then we get into those questions, time, place, and manner questions. We reinvent a whole political history and a legacy of democratic knowledge inside this digital environment, which I do think is essentially under-socialized. It's a new media, and what we're in the process of doing here, I think even today, is precisely trying to, tease apart the complexity of how we want to socialize this media to reflect the kind of society we want to live in. So it's partly problem solving, like let's get rid of dengue fever, or let's help people to be better at taking care of themselves, but it's also partly about the assumption that we're going to be living in a world where there's going to be a world of conflict. At least that's what a liberal politics would want to say. We don't want a world that ends conflict. We want a world that manages conflict successfully.
But let's have one more. What do we say? We have two more. Let's just take them and then close. Go ahead.
I think it's a related question, and that I think that in focusing on participation, one of the participants that gets not necessarily a full set of attention is basically precedent, cultural heritage, history, even the cultural knowledge that's embodied in the university. So how is it possible that the university, what is the role of the university in trying to maintain some of that knowledge that has been built up over hundreds of years in a contextual way that can be used with the ongoing participatory discussions?
Okay, do we have one more?
Yes, there is a lot of research done in community communications on the issues of difference and empathy and what online, what cues and what levels of identity presented alter that sort of thing. Sociological research that might be into the beginning. I want to say I find really interesting and kind of heartening that all these great thoughts and minds are coming towards the idea that it's not just engineering and it's not just social science that you need. We could call user-centered design, which I just want to make a pitch for the iSchool here at Berkeley, which I graduated from recently, and it's very interdisciplinary and it's kind of what we're all about. It's great to hear you all coming in and saying like recreating the idea of the iSchool independently.
Well, on that note of recreating the wheel, which is what we always do all the time.
No.
But I do think that we live in a situation today where the Occupy movement has been so inspiring because people need that mutual recognition, that idea that is about direct democracy. So representative democracy is not to be eliminated. No one is proposing that. But there is something about directness that people seem to want to have a tremendous desire for today. How it's going to play out with this new technology, the framings, the ethical decisions. I'm hoping that in this afternoon we're going to hear from 3 activists and others from Poland who will hopefully tell us a bit more. How would activists who are already making framings, who already have those projects, who have made ethical and political decisions and are putting those out there for evaluation, how they would use a project like City Sandbox or Open Talk?
Open Town Hall.
Open Town Hall, or things like that. Because that's already a framing that we need to consider. So thank you very much for participating. It's fantastic to hear your comments. Let's take a short break and come back in maybe 10 minutes.
So any engineers must be interested in this.
I'm actually trained.